never liked grocery shopping late at night. Something about those long, empty aisles, the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights, and the distant hum of the coolers always made me uneasy. But I had worked late and had no choice. I needed milk, some bread, and a few other essentials. Walmart was nearly deserted. A single cashier stood at the front, absently scrolling on her phone. A bored-looking security guard leaned against a counter, half watching the front doors. The air smelled faintly of floor cleaner and stale popcorn from the closed snack bar. I grabbed a cart and started down the aisles. The place felt too quiet, like I had walked in after hours and wasn't supposed to be there. My footsteps echoed against the polished floor. Every so often, I heard the distant squeak of another cart, but I never saw anyone. Then I turned into aisle 13. That's when I saw her. A woman stood perfectly still, her back to me, facing the shelves. She was wearing a long gray dress, something outdated, maybe from the 90s. Her dark hair hung loose over her shoulders, unmoving. I hesitated. There was something unsettling about her, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way she stood, stiff, rigid. Or maybe it was the way she stared at the cereal boxes, as if she had been there for hours, unable to decide. I pushed my cart forward, trying not to pay attention. But as I passed her, a sudden, ice-cold chill ran through my body. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't stop. I didn't look at her. I just kept walking, feeling an overwhelming sense of wrongness, like I had intruded on something I shouldn't have. When I reached the end of the aisle, curiosity got the best of me. I turned back. She was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Just gone. A prickling sensation crawled up my spine. My eyes darted around, scanning the aisle. She couldn't have left so quickly. There were no doors, no exits. I peeked into the next aisle. Empty. The one after that. Empty. A growing sense of dread coiled in my stomach. She had disappeared. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I had imagined her. Maybe she was a worker who knew some shortcut. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I continued shopping, but my hands felt clammy against the cart handle. My heart was beating too fast. Every few minutes, I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see her standing there. I was reaching for a loaf of bread when I heard something. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. Right behind me. I spun around. No one was there. The store was silent. I swallowed hard, grabbed my things, and made my way to the checkout. At the self-checkout, I hesitated before speaking to the cashier. A young guy in his 20s with tired eyes and a Walmart vest. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "This might sound weird, but do you have a lady in a gray dress working here?" He frowned. "Nah, man. Not that I know of." I swallowed. I just saw a woman in aisle 13. She was staring at the shelves, and then she just disappeared. The cashier's face changed. His expression tightened, and he glanced at the security guard. The guard, who had seemed half asleep a moment ago, was suddenly paying attention. "What did she look like?" the guard asked. I told him. His face paled. "You saw her too," he said quietly. A shiver ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. The cashier and the guard exchanged a look. Then the guard sighed. "A lady died here," he said, voice low. "Right in aisle 13. I felt the world tilt slightly. What happened?" "No one knows for sure," he said. "She was just found one morning. Security footage never showed her coming in. One of the workers found her on the floor, face down, just dead. Heart attack." I asked, my mouth dry. The guard hesitated. "That's what they put on the report. But the weird thing is her face." My hands gripped the checkout counter. "What about her face?" "They say she died with her eyes wide open. Like she saw something. Something that scared her to death." A heavy silence settled between us. I scanned my groceries as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. As I left the store, I could feel eyes on me, watching, and in the reflection of the sliding doors, just for a split second, I thought I saw her standing there. Still, staring, and smiling. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing motionless in the aisle, her back to me. I dreamed of her face, pale and lifeless, eyes stretched wide in terror. The next day, I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light, an overactive imagination. But as the days passed, strange things started happening. The first was my phone. I woke up to find the Walmart app open, flashing a message. Come back to aisle 13. I hadn't opened it. The second was the cereal box in my kitchen. The same brand she had been staring at. I knew I hadn't bought it. Then came the whispers. Faint, lingering in the corners of my apartment. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. But they grew louder, more insistent. One night, I heard my name. I turned on every light in my apartment. And that's when I saw her, in the reflection of my bedroom window, standing behind me, smiling. It started with a craving. I wasn't planning on going to Walmart that night. It was late, I was tired, and the idea of standing under those harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by aisles of processed food and discount bins, wasn't appealing. But I was hungry, and my fridge was empty. So, against my better judgment, I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest 24-hour Walmart. The parking lot was mostly empty when I pulled in. A few scattered cars, an old truck idling near the entrance, its exhaust curling into the cold night air. Inside, the store felt off. The silence stretched too long between the occasional overhead announcements. The automatic doors hissed open, and I stepped into the too bright space, blinking against the light. I grabbed a cart and made my way through the aisles, tossing a few essentials inside. Bread, a gallon of milk, a box of cereal I hadn't eaten since I was a kid. Then I turned into the frozen food section. The second I did, a chill wrapped around me, colder than it should have been. The freezers hummed softly, their glass doors fogged over with condensation. My breath came out in a thin cloud, visible for just a second before vanishing. I stopped in front of the pizzas, scanning the rows for something cheap and easy. That's when it happened. The freezer door swung open by itself. Not a little shift. Not a slow creak. It jerked open completely, like someone on the other side had pulled it. I felt a sharp stab of unease. For a second, I just stood there, waiting for some kind of explanation. Maybe the suction from another door opening nearby had pulled it loose. Maybe the cooling system was off balance. But none of the other doors had moved. I let out a nervous chuckle, more for myself than anything. Shaking my head, I reached in and grabbed a frozen pizza, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. Then, as I went to shut the door, I saw it. A reflection in the glass. But it wasn't mine. A dark figure stood just behind me, its body stretched long and thin, its face hollow. Deep, empty sockets where its eyes should have been. A mouth frozen in a soundless scream. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it with my sleeve. The reflection was gone. I spun around. My pulse slammed against my ribs. Nothing. The aisle was completely empty. I swallowed hard. My skin prickled with something I refused to name. Slowly, I placed the pizza in my cart and started walking toward the front of the store, trying to convince myself I had imagined the whole thing. A trick of the condensation. A warped reflection of one of the overhead lights. But I knew that wasn't true. I left my cart by the self-checkout, shoved a crumpled 20 at the machine, and bolted for the exit. The entire drive home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing standing in the freezer glass, watching me. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard a noise from the kitchen. A soft creak. My stomach turned to ice. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. Another creak. Then a click. The sound of a door swinging open. I threw off the covers, my pulse thudding in my ears. The air was colder than before, like the temperature in my apartment had dropped several degrees. When I reached the kitchen, I stopped dead in my tracks. My freezer door was wide open. Cold mist poured out, sliding over the tile floor. My breath came out in shaky clouds. My hands trembled as I reached out to close it, but before I could touch the handle, something moved inside. A shadow, shifting behind the rows of frozen food. A flicker of motion, too fast to be my imagination. Then a whisper. A breathy sound, just on the edge of hearing. I slammed the door shut. My hands were ice cold. The air felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't see. I barely slept after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like I wasn't alone. The next morning, I grabbed my phone to check my messages. But something was already open on the screen. The Walmart app. I hadn't opened it. A notification flashed. Item still in cart, frozen pizza. Returned to store to complete purchase. My stomach dropped. I never scanned the pizza. I had left it behind. So why was it in my cart? And why did I suddenly feel like something wanted me to go back? I deleted the app, turned my phone off, tried to ignore the unease clawing at my chest. But the freezer door kept opening. No matter how many times I checked it, no matter how tightly I shut it, then the ice started melting. Water pooled on the kitchen floor, seeping out like something was trying to escape. The air smelled different, sharp and metallic, like something rotting in the cold. I threw the fridge out, bought a new one, but the nightmares didn't stop. In my sleep, I kept seeing the figure. Not just standing in the freezer now, but closer, pressed against the glass, watching me. Then one night, I woke up freezing. The air in my apartment was so cold that my breath fogged the air, just like in the store. My hands were stiff, my skin numb. And from the kitchen, I heard the slow, deliberate creak of the freezer door swinging open. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, just above a whisper, right behind me, I heard it speak. It only said 2 words. You left. I was never a fan of late-night shopping. Something about the near-empty aisles, the fluorescent lights buzzing like dying insects, and the muffled sound of employees restocking shelves made Walmart feel less like a store and more like a place caught between worlds. Too empty to be alive, too artificial to be abandoned. But that night, I had no choice. It was close to midnight, and I had forgotten to pick up a birthday gift for my niece. So there I was wandering through the store, trying to find something decent in the toy aisle. That's when I heard it. A child's scream. Not the kind you hear from a kid throwing a tantrum. Not the whiny, high-pitched wail of someone who didn't get their way. This was different. It was raw, piercing, filled with something that cut through my chest like ice. Pure terror. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I followed the sound, turning sharply down an aisle packed with dolls and stuffed animals. Empty. The scream had come from here. I was sure of it. But there was no child. No parent frantically searching for their kid. Just row after row of cold, plastic faces staring back at me. I stood there, heart hammering, listening. The store was silent. Then footsteps. A woman rounded the corner, eyes wide, her breath coming in quick bursts. She looked at me, then at the empty aisle. You, she swallowed. You heard that too, right? I nodded slowly. She hugged herself, glancing around as if expecting something, or someone to jump out. I thought a kid was in trouble. But, she trailed off, shaking her head. Before I could respond, someone else spoke. A Walmart employee, standing just behind us. A young guy, probably in his early 20s, his face unusually pale. He had been stocking shelves, but now he just stared at us. It happens sometimes, he said, voice low. The woman and I exchanged glances. What happens? I asked. He hesitated, then sighed like he was tired of explaining. The screaming. People hear it now and then. Always in this aisle. He nodded toward the rows of dolls. Some think it's just the old security speakers glitching. But what? I pressed. He licked his lips, suddenly looking uneasy. There was a little girl. She went missing. Years ago. A chill crawled up my spine. What do you mean, went missing? The woman asked. The employee glanced around, lowering his voice. She was here with her mom. They were shopping for toys. The mom turned around for a second, just a second, and the kid was gone. Vanished. Security footage showed her walking down this aisle. He pointed to the very spot we were standing. And then nothing. Just gone. I stared at the empty space in front of me, my skin crawling. They never found her? I asked. He shook his head. Nope. No sign of her. No leads. Just gone. The woman took a small step back, her face tight with something like fear. And the scream. The worker swallowed. People started hearing it a few months later. Always late at night. Always in this aisle. I didn't like the way he said that. Like the little girl wasn't just gone. Like she was still here. I tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. You're messing with us, right? Just trying to scare the late-night shoppers. The worker didn't smile. Believe what you want, he said. But don't stay here too long. Then he turned and walked away, pushing his cart of stock down the aisle. The woman and I stood there for a few seconds, silent. Then, the dolls on the shelf shifted. Not a lot, just enough. A few leaned forward as if listening. We both saw it. We both saw it. The woman gasped and grabbed my arm. "Nope," she muttered. "Nope, I'm done." She turned on her heel and walked away fast. I should have followed her. I should have left. But something made me stay. I looked at the dolls. The cheap, plastic ones with painted-on eyes. The stuffed animals with stitched smiles. One of them, a doll on the middle shelf, was facing the wrong way. Like something had turned it. A chill wrapped around me. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. Then softly I heard it. A giggle. A child's giggle. Not distant. Not over the speakers. Right behind me. I ran. Didn't look back. Didn't stop until I was in my car, doors locked, engine running. As I peeled out of the parking lot, my hands were shaking. I told myself I imagined it. That I was just tired. That my brain had twisted the story into something worse than it was. But that night, as I lay in bed, my phone buzzed. A notification. I picked it up with a trembling hand. New toy available for pickup. Thank you for your purchase. I never bought anything. I never scanned anything. And the item listed? A doll. From Walmart. I deleted the message. Blocked the number. But when I turned off my phone, I heard something just outside my bedroom door. A soft, high-pitched giggle. Then the quiet shuffle of tiny feet on the floor. I never went back to that Walmart again. Walmart at midnight is its own kind of eerie. It's too quiet, except for the occasional beeping of the checkout scanners and the faint, tinny music from unseen speakers. The aisles stretch on forever, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The whole place feels like a ghost town. Just you, the shelves, and a few exhausted employees dragging pallets of merchandise down empty lanes. I wasn't planning on staying long. Just a quick run for a few essentials. Frozen pizza, some snacks, a six-pack. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to grab my things and go. Self-checkout was nearly empty when I reached it. A couple of other late-night shoppers were scanning their items in a daze. I took my spot at an open register, sliding my frozen pizza across the scanner. The screen flickered for a second, but I ignored it. Then, as I was bagging my things, I caught something strange in the monitor above me. At first, it was just a flicker, like static interference on an old TV. The store's security screens were mounted high up, showing black and white feeds of the checkout area. I glanced up casually, expecting to see myself standing there, shoving my groceries into a plastic bag. But there was someone else in the reflection. A man, tall, dressed in dark clothes, standing right behind me. My breath hitched. Every muscle in my body went tight. I spun around so fast that my plastic bag nearly toppled off the counter. Nothing. The space behind me was completely empty. I stood there frozen, heart hammering in my chest. I knew what I had seen. He had been right there, right behind me. Slowly, I turned back to the monitor. The man was still there. And now he was grinning. I felt something shift deep in my gut, something instinctive and primal. My hands went cold. I stared at the screen, my reflection standing stiff and frozen at the checkout. Behind me, the grinning man didn't move. He was too tall, his limbs too long, his head slightly tilted, like he was enjoying this. I swallowed hard. Then I did the one thing every horror movie tells you not to do. I looked over my shoulder again. Still nothing. But when I turned back to the monitor, his grin had widened. I wasn't thinking anymore. I just grabbed my last bag, yanked my receipt out of the machine, and speed-walked toward the exit. Something about that moment, the weight of it, made my skin crawl. I wasn't alone. I felt it. The automatic doors took a second too long to slide open. In that brief hesitation, I caught my reflection in the glass. And I saw him, standing right over my shoulder. I staggered forward as the doors finally let me through, stepping into the cold night air. But that feeling, that unbearable sense of being watched, stuck to me like a shadow. I kept my head down and made a beeline for my car, keys already clutched in my sweaty hand. The Walmart parking lot was nearly empty, just a handful of cars scattered across the vast space. I reached my car, heart pounding, and yanked the door open. Then I made a mistake. I looked back. He was standing at the entrance of Walmart. Tall, dressed in dark clothes, still grinning. I froze, gripping my car door. The automatic doors behind him were wide open, leading into the empty store. But he hadn't come out. I had watched those doors the whole time. He was just there. I scrambled into the car and locked the doors. My hands shook as I shoved the key into the ignition. I half expected the engine not to start. That classic horror movie moment where the victim fumbles with the key while the monster looms closer. But the car roared to life. I flicked on the headlights. The man was gone. The Walmart doors had shut, the entrance looking as normal as ever. The parking lot was empty, just a quiet stretch of asphalt under the humming streetlights. I didn't waste time questioning it. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of there, my tires screeching against the pavement. I forced myself to calm down on the drive home. My rational brain tried to explain it away. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the flickering security screen had glitched. Maybe the figure at the door was just another late-night shopper, some creepy dude with a weird smile. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had almost convinced myself. I sat in the car for a minute, taking slow breaths, waiting for my pulse to settle. Then I grabbed my phone, and my blood went cold. The screen was on. The camera app was open. It was showing a live feed of my car's interior. I was in the frame. My seat, my steering wheel, the dashboard. But there was something else. Something in the back seat. A tall, dark figure. Grinning. I dropped my phone. My breath caught in my throat. I was too scared to turn around. But then the breathing started. Slow. Heavy. Right behind me. A single word rasped out, so close that I felt the whisper of air against my neck. Smile. My body moved before my mind did. I threw the door open and lunged out of the car, nearly falling onto the pavement. My keys slipped from my hand and clattered onto the driveway. I spun around, expecting what? A monster? A shadow? The car was empty. The back seat was empty. I stood there, panting, my breath fogging in the cold air. My phone lay face up on the ground, the camera still open. I hesitated, then bent down and picked it up. The screen was black. The app had closed. I swallowed hard. My car door was still open, the engine still running. The only sound was the quiet hum of the radio. Nothing was there. I forced myself to move, slamming the door shut, grabbing my keys, and bolting into my house. I locked the door behind me and checked every room. Twice. Nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won over fear. I crawled into bed, telling myself I had imagined it all. Then, at 3:13 a.m., I woke up. Not to a noise. Not to movement. But to a notification on my phone. New security camera footage available. My stomach dropped. I didn't have security cameras. My hand trembled as I tapped the notification. A video opened. The footage was grainy, black and white, just like the Walmart security monitor. It showed my bedroom, me lying in bed asleep, and in the corner of the screen, a tall, dark figure standing in the doorway, grinning. I never liked mannequins. Something about them always felt off. Those blank, expressionless faces, the stiff poses, the way they stood frozen in a moment that was meant to look natural but never did. But they were just plastic, just store decorations, nothing more. At least, that's what I always told myself. That changed one night at Walmart. It was close to midnight, and the store was almost empty. The few customers who were still around wandered the aisles in a tired daze, pushing half-filled carts under the flickering fluorescent lights. A distant voice announced the upcoming store closing over the intercom, but no one seemed to be in a hurry. I wasn't planning to stay long, just needed a few basic things. Some milk, a loaf of bread, a six-pack of beer. I had most of my items and was cutting through the clothing section toward the registers when I saw it. The mannequin. At first, it was just something in my peripheral vision, something that didn't seem quite right. I wasn't even looking for it, but my gaze was drawn to it, as if my brain had registered that something was wrong before I was even fully aware of it. And when I turned my head and really looked, my stomach twisted. It was different from the others. The rest stood upright, positioned normally, dressed in cheap Walmart fashion. But this one, its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like its neck had been snapped. Its arms were bent in a way that didn't match the usual stiff mannequin poses. One slightly raised, fingers curled. It almost looked like it was reaching for something. The face, blank as always, was pointed slightly downward like it was watching me. I stopped walking. I don't know why, but I just stood there staring at it. My gut twisted with a sick sense of unease, that deep down feeling you get when something isn't supposed to be the way it is. It's just a mannequin. That's what I told myself. I forced myself to walk past it. And then, rustling, the softest sound of fabric shifting. I stopped dead. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see it again. The mannequin was closer. I swear to God, it had moved. My breath caught. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe. Then I heard it. A single, light tap against plastic. Like a stiff, lifeless finger knocking against something. I turned my head fully, and my blood turned to ice. Its hand was raised. It hadn't been raised before. I felt my whole body go numb. I took a slow step back, my heartbeat thudding in my ears. The store around me seemed suddenly too quiet, like the air itself had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to look away, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. It was closer than before. I could see the tiny scuff marks on its plastic fingers, the faint seams where the pieces connected. I could even see a small chip in its wrist, like something had cracked it open. I had to move. I forced my feet to move. I turned away, fast, and speed-walked toward the checkout lanes. My skin crawled with the overwhelming feeling of being watched. I made it to the front of the store and dumped my items onto the conveyor belt. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my wallet. The cashier, some guy with a Walmart vest and a Zach name tag, gave me a lazy glance as he scanned my things. "You alright, dude?" I hesitated. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I had to ask. "Hey, the mannequins back there. Do they ever move?" Zach stopped scanning for a second. Then he smirked. "Oh, yeah." He bagged my loaf of bread and slid it across the counter. "That one moves sometimes." I felt my stomach drop. He said it so casually, like it was just another normal part of working the night shift at Walmart. I tried to laugh, but it came out weak. "You're joking, right?" Zach shrugged. "Dunno, man. A couple of us have seen it. Sometimes it's facing one way, and later it's turned a little. We figure maybe some kid moves it, but I dunno." He glanced up at me and grinned. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He just chuckled and handed me my receipt. "Have a good night." I took my bags and left without looking back. When I stepped into the parking lot, the night air hit me like a slap. Cold and sharp. The silence out here was thick, the store's fluorescent glow casting long, empty shadows across the pavement. I hurried to my car, throwing my bags into the passenger seat and locking the doors the second I was inside. But I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something had followed me, that if I turned my head, I'd see it standing at the entrance of Walmart, just beyond the glass doors, still and silent, waiting. I sucked in a shaky breath and forced myself to turn my head. The entrance was empty, just a normal Walmart, just a normal night. I exhaled and started the car. It was nothing, just my imagination. I kept telling myself that over and over, even as I drove home, even as I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, even as I stepped inside and locked the door behind me, even as I checked the closet before going to bed, something I hadn't done in years. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that it was just a mannequin, that it couldn't follow me home, that it couldn't be standing outside my bedroom door right now, listening.